Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nonprofit Enthusiast Live. I'm your host, Lasheena Williams, and I am so excited to be here today and kick off the conversation for this month, which is our entire topic. The entire month is fund development and year-end planning. Last month, we talked about community building. So if you missed any of those sessions, please go back, check out the guide section because there's a lot of very helpful information that was shared around community building. Today, we have our very special guest, Kimberly Swartz, back with us. Kimberly has joined us in past lives, so you definitely want to check out those lives that she was in prior to. And before I bring her up, I just want to introduce her really quickly for those of you who have not met Kimberly. So, Kimberly is a social change professional who believes that forging more connections between community members is what will make our world safer, kinder, and more just. A Taproot Foundation Director of Community Engagement. She leads the programmatic design and management of Taproot Plus, an innovative tech platform that matches social change organization with pro bono resources. We love pro bono and new nonprofit, right? In 2022 alone, Taproot Plus connected 3,000 nonprofits with over 6.75 million in volunteer services and welcomed 11,000 new business professionals to their community of difference makers. So Kimberly is going to talk a little bit more about Taproot. If you are not using Taproot as a resource, I definitely encourage you to do so. So let's go ahead and welcome Kimberly. Hello, hello. How are you doing, Kimberly?
I'm doing good. I hope everyone here is having a good, I almost said start to your week, but we're almost done with the week.
Mm-hmm. Start to the month.
Start to the month. That's a better way to put it.
Yep. Yeah, so glad to have you back on. It's always great to be in conversation with you and also learn about the many resources of Taproot. And actually, the last time you were on, I didn't tell you this. We talked a little bit about your background in AmeriCorps, and I did some research here locally and had some conversations here to see how we can work with them as well. So I appreciate.
I'm so glad.
Sharing, yes.
Yeah, and just to put my AmeriCorps hat back on for a second, if folks haven't seen the big news, the Biden administration just really expanded their investment in AmeriCorps and youth service and volunteerism in general, and they've created something called the Climate Corps, which is going to take young people and put funding against putting them in communities who are actively being harmed by climate change, and they're going to work with nonprofits, governmental groups to try and combat those harmful effects. So Climate Corps, AmeriCorps, all the corps, all the national volunteer services, definitely check it out because I know it's not specifically fund development, but it's absolutely capacity building resources for your nonprofits.
Absolutely. Yes, definitely check that out. The Corp is just a wonderful resource for nonprofits as a whole. So I appreciate you talking about that. So this month's topic, as you know, is fund development, year-end planning, anywhere you want to go and zoom in on. I think you want to talk a little bit about year-end planning and what nonprofits can do right now. So I'll hand it over to you. What are some tips you have for nonprofits when it comes to getting ready for the end of the year? And I'm like, oh my gosh, we're almost there already.
I know. I think 2023 has absolutely been a whirlwind. And I think before I dive into some of the things that I'm currently thinking about, it might be helpful for folks just to hear about the perspective I'm bringing to this. So Taproot Foundation, as Lasheena already mentioned, US-based nonprofit, we're kind of in the business of helping other nonprofit organizations. So we know there's a big resource gap, and how we close that resource gap is by motivating talent from corporate spaces and really democratizing access to wealth and resources. So we connect nonprofits with pro bono in areas like advertising, IT, finance, business strategy, HR, etc. And so I work in the program design space of all of that. So how can we create experiences, both online, virtual experiences, and in-person experiences that help our nonprofit and volunteer community members, first of all, like gain a lot of value from one another, but also just be delighted and filled with joy at this, active service and active community that they're embarking on together. And so that was the perspective that, Lasheena, when you shared what your topic focus was for the month, that I really wanted to focus on, because there's some things that I'm really digging into right now from a data and just like program evaluation perspective right now, that I really think would be valuable for any nonprofit, regardless of maybe where their program or service areas are in. So some of the things that are definitely top on my list when it comes for 2024 planning is just getting my data in order. If it's been a while since you've done a competitive analysis, thinking about where your nonprofit fits in the relation to the field or even the geographic space that you're in. If you're a nonprofit based in Tampa, Florida, and you're delivering services to people experiencing homelessness, like figuring out who else is in your space, both from a competitor perspective, so maybe who similar like grantees or individual donors may be giving to instead of you, or maybe it's an and/or situation, or figuring out peers who are operating in the same space as you, space meaning mission area or geographic area. So definitely start with that competitive or even like collaborator analysis, just to figure out how you could position yourself, what sets you apart, what are the differentiating factors that you can focus on in your fundraising for next year, as well as your marketing and brand awareness for next year. Because that's going to impact not only the donations and business support, institutional foundation support that you can bring in, but also just the individual volunteers and community members that you're going to attract to your website, your programs, your in-person events, etc. So definitely competitor collaborator analysis. I love them. I would recommend them to anyone.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit more about what that might look like when you're doing your competitor analysis and then when you're doing your collaborator analysis. And I guess a little bit about what you would do once you kind of extract that information.
Absolutely. So when you're thinking through your competitive analysis, you really want to focus on brand positioning. I know it feels a little strange to think about your nonprofit as a brand, but it is important. Some of these things from the corporate space do have very real value for our nonprofits. And so even though it feels a little hinky in the moment, there is a lot of value to be gained there in thinking about how do stakeholders perceive your organization versus how do you want to be perceived by them? How do you want to be perceived by a community member or a potential funder or a volunteer? And something that can help with that, so kind of a supporting piece of all of this, is just having stakeholder interviews, just doing some one-on-ones with the people in your community so that you're not just assuming their perception of you or assuming what their experience with your organization or your brand has been, but actually taking the time to gather data directly from those audience members. So I really like stakeholder interviews. These are one-on-one conversations where you kind of go through a prepared list of questions around what have you really loved that we do? What would you think we need to improve on? And then you could also consider an end of year survey to your stakeholders as well. This helps it have the option to be anonymous, which sometimes is how people are going to want to share feedback. They might not feel comfortable in a one-on-one setting. Another option to consider is something called a focus group, where you could bring together a segment of specific stakeholders like program participants. You could bring them together for more of a group conversation where you go through some of those same prepared interview questions, but sometimes an idea or a reflection from one audience member will then spark something in another focus group member. So that can be a really great way just to get some more audience engagement happening. So all of those different ways, stakeholder interviews, focus groups, just touch point survey, a pulse survey is what I've heard it called as well, can all be really valuable to help fuel this larger overarching competitive analysis to see how your brand stacks up against other brands in the same field as you.
Wow, I love that. And then so now you have that information.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some recommendations as to what you're doing with that information outside? Because sometimes what will happen is you host these focus groups, you'll do these different things, and then business happens and it's business as usual. So what do you recommend doing now that the analysis is completed?
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like this is part of a bigger overarching question at nonprofit organizations around like how community driven, how grassroots driven are we, right? How do we, what's our goal? Like, what's our strategy for allowing community members to really be a part of the decision making and like where our priorities and focus areas are going to be? And so I think that's an amazing conversation to have with your board and your executive leadership team, just even going into these types of planning exercises, because you want to be able to share with stakeholders like, yeah, spend this time with us, give us your insights, and then this is what it's going to be funneled into. This is how it's going to be used.
Mhm.
So I know I just went up to like the 30,000 foot level, but I think it's healthy to think through, you know, how community driven are you going to allow yourself to be? But then just to be more specific, I think that a really good practice is to have one or two tactics, like program tactics, be determined by community suggestions. So I can share a personal example. In setting the volunteer engagement strategy for this year at Taproot Foundation, I did extensive interviewing and focus groups with different segments of the Taproot volunteer community. And I did those in like October, early November of 2022. And I shared with them really transparently, you all are going to have amazing ideas during these discussions. And I'm so excited to talk them out with you and hear what you have to say. I cannot commit to acting on all of them in 2023. But what I can commit to is keeping track of all of them and acting on one or two of the top most feasible ones. And so I was just really transparent about our bandwidth as a nonprofit and our power to actually act on these. And so sure enough, some of the ideas that came out of those focus group efforts had to do with, they wanted more education on some of the social cause areas that Taproot typically works with. And we are, just sales hat on for a second, we are open to any nonprofit cause area, but there are certain causes that we just see a little bit more frequently through our programs. And volunteers were craving more education on that. And so in response to that, this year we have executed a series of community-led panels where volunteers have had the option to join and get educated on things like voting rights nonprofits and kind of what they're working on from a bipartisan perspective to advance voting rights, human rights, et cetera. Same with healthcare access. We did one on housing and homelessness. We did one with, we called it our Galentine's Day event. It was the day before Valentine's Day. And we spoke with organizations who are advocating for women and girls and expanding education access for them. And so that was a volunteer generated idea, but then Taproot put our own spin on it and executed it throughout the year.
Awesome. Love that. So any other year-end planning tips that you have? And then I would love for you to talk about Taproot and it being a resource for nonprofits. And then even if you can also talk to the fact of, because this month theme of fund development or year-end planning, how does some of those Taproot initiatives help nonprofits in the area of fund development? What does that look like in terms of projects?
Yeah, that's such a good good question. The one last tip that I would offer on just the end of year planning, I really love SWOT analyses as well. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I think after doing some stakeholder interviews, checking the pulse of your community members, doing some competitive analysis, seeing how your brand is positioned out in the space you're in, you'll be really well set up for a really comprehensive SWOT. So strengths and weaknesses are kind of internal. What do you feel you do really well versus what do you think you have opportunities to do a little bit more strong with a little bit more strength, versus opportunities and threats are kind of external factors. So if you're a nonprofit based in Florida, a very real external threat could be hurricane season. What if that disrupts our on the ground operations? Like, that's something that you really should think through, potentially creating a plan for, like a crisis response plan for. COVID, the pandemic continuing, right? That's another external threat that you would perhaps want to do some planning around. So SWOT analysis, always really recommend. I think it's valuable in end of year planning, but honestly, probably a valuable exercise to just make sure you're repeating once every year or two, especially if you're around the strategic planning process. But then your question around kind of how this can flow into ways to engage volunteers through Taproot or otherwise, I'm always more than happy to talk about that, because all of these things that I've mentioned are actually really great ways to make use of resources from the corporate sector. So like I mentioned earlier, that's kind of Taproot's bread and butter. And so I would really invite you all to create an account on taprootplus.org. And it's free to use and is accessible to any US-based nonprofit. Or if you aren't yet a registered charitable organization, but you're fiscally sponsored, maybe you're a startup and you're in an incubator, if you are fiscally sponsored, you can still work with us. So we really are trying to lower all barriers to entry for resources. And so I know you're thinking a lot about fund development right now. And so where I would encourage you to think is around in-kind resource raising. So thinking through product donations or service donations, ways that you can still shore up the infrastructure of your nonprofit. And so instead of spending budget on contractors or consultants in marketing or in HR or IT, instead you can save that budget and spend it on your programmatic expenses and all of the wonderful mission work that you're doing in the community. So if you really love the idea of a SWOT analysis, or you really love the idea of conducting stakeholder interviews, that is something you can find volunteers for. We have great ones on Taproot Plus, and I would love to see you on there. But also, like, this is a great way to engage your board members as well. And get your board to reach out to their own network of professionals too. And board members really should be getting involved in the year-end planning process. This is a great way to get them to feel really bought into, all right, here's what we've succeeded at as an organization, and here's what we want to look to in the future. Here's how we aspire to look in the future, and get them to play an active role in helping map out those next steps. And, you know, what better way to get them to play an active role but to be an in-kind resource raiser for you, right? Tap into your network, let them know that we posted a pro bono request on Taproot Plus and we need a volunteer to conduct a SWOT analysis for us. Like, that's a great, easy ask for a board member to share out on LinkedIn.
Love it. And do you have certain requests that you get a lot of from volunteers, like that they're looking for these type of projects?
Yeah, that is such an interesting question. So our most popular volunteer engagement is what we call like a multi-week project. It's where a volunteer and a nonprofit work together, generally on something that has a really concrete deliverable. So conducting 6 interviews with program participants, like that's an example of something really, really concrete. And so those are always really popular if they can be wrapped up in like 1 to 2 months. Once you start going beyond that like 2-month standpoint, then it gets harder for you to recruit volunteer talent. So
Okay.
like if you have something a little bit more open-ended, like I just need help managing my social media channels. That's a position that's not necessarily a pro bono project. And so for those instances, we would typically go back to the nonprofit and just make some recommendations on how can we trim this down? How can we set like some boundaries and make this more of a discrete area for someone to be really successful in? But that said, I will say one of our areas that's getting more and more popular for volunteers, and we consistently have people come to us and say, hey, do you have like more options like this? Is 1 hour effectively like consultation calls. So nonprofits will say, hey, I need to create a new website, but I have no web development experience. Where do I start? That is a perfect call to have with a web designer. Right? And so they can give you a lot of expertise and knowledge about like how to even approach the process, like what to look for in a firm if you want to hire someone versus what to look for in a volunteer if you want to recruit someone to do it pro bono. So 1 hour consultation calls, we call them sessions on the website. Those are getting more and more popular. And I volunteer and consult regularly with nonprofits as well. And I've got to say, I do mostly sessions these days, just because it's a really flexible way for me to just fit volunteerism into my schedule. And then one more piece that I would add to that is that Taproot is about to kick off. I was just chatting with Lasheena about this before the call, but we're about to kick off a holiday giving volunteerism drive, which I'm really excited about. Basically, I'm sure as the nonprofit leaders on the call know, it's been a tough year for volunteerism and individual giving. Folks are dealing with really tight pocketbooks right now. And so it's been difficult for households to donate financially as much as they have in years past. And also because of that, their time is also really restricted. And so it's been more difficult for them to go to like in-person volunteerism, like days of service. And so Taproot is trying to do our best to just acknowledge that, you know, things are tough right now. And there are other ways that folks can make really valuable donations to nonprofits. And so some of the things that we're really going to be pushing for in the next couple of months are like copywriting projects. Those are really popular with volunteers. We have so many great marketing volunteers or just people experienced with communications. And like, heck yes, a volunteer can 100% help you write some fundraising emails that you can send out throughout the year, or make like 20 social media posts that you'll just be able to grab and go from next year, or even maybe write a new draft of your elevator pitch, kind of how you sell yourself to funders. So copywriting is an awesome way to leverage folks, especially during the holiday season. That'll only take a few weeks for someone to really knock out of the park for you. I will also say that graphic design is a really great way to engage folks too. You have so many wonderful designers out there. It's an easy way for your nonprofit to save budget that you would have normally spent on contractor budget, and instead just work with someone pro bono.
Love that. Oh my gosh. I love all of these ideas. So, and I'm sure that there are nonprofits listening that can use copywriting support, social media support, graphic design support, all the areas that I see you all drop into the group often that you're looking for help with. So here's your answer is to go check out Taproot, and it's no cost to you all. So you definitely, when looking for volunteers, should add Taproot to your list of places to look for pro bono support to help you in different aspects of your organization. So I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. And the one thing that I'll add in is that Taproot, we're a nonprofit here to support other nonprofits. So everything is truly cost-free. But even though there's not like a financial fee, it does take time and energy to think about bringing volunteers into your organization. So, just with my volunteer management hat on for a second, I would just really encourage you all to think about that relationship really seriously. Like, these pro bono consultants are kind of becoming your team members and teammates for a month, 2 months, maybe even more. And so think about it really seriously. Like, do you have the time to really onboard that person, tell them all about your mission, introduce them to your team, and get them the resources and feedback that they're going to need to be a really successful teammate for you? Even though it's only a couple of months, you never know where that pro bono relationship may lead. I can't tell you, like, there are countless instances where one pro bono project has led to a volunteer becoming like a full-time consultant for the organization, or a board member for the organization, or a donor for the organization. But that only happens when you make it a really great experience for the volunteer during their first interaction with you. So make sure you have the time and energy to just invest in this new teammate that you're bringing on board.
I love that. And if there's someone like they know they need help
Yeah.
and they're just trying to figure out, like how you talked about, that's a position versus that's a good
Yeah.
project to put in to Taproot. Is there a resource within Taproot that nonprofits can reach out to say, hey, this is what I'm experiencing, this is what I'm looking for? And kind of could say,
Yeah.
oh, you can do these type of projects. I guess that's a project in itself. Kind
Yeah. No, and I promise I did not feed that to Lasheena, but
of.
the need that you just listed out is exactly why we actually created a new position this year in 2023, and it's
Okay.
called our nonprofit success coach.
Oh,
And so
good.
it's a full-time person. They sit on my team. It's wonderful. He has so much experience in the nonprofit space,
Mhm.
and he effectively just talks to organizations like yours every day and helps them kind of do a bit of root cause analysis on, all right, you've got a list of needs. Here are ones that could be a good fit for pro bono. And here's what I recommend tackling first, second, third. Let's create some scopes of work for some volunteers. So I promise I did not feed that
Yeah.
in advance, but that is something we do have, and it's free to use. It's just nonprofit success at taprootfoundation.org is the email.
Awesome.
So Lasheena, I'll send you that
Okay.
email after the event.
Okay, that sounds good. And I can type it in the chat as well. We'll put it in chat as well
Perfect.
once we get it. So nonprofit success at taproot.org. Awesome.
Taprootfoundation.org.
Foundation.org. Okay, awesome. We'll make sure that goes in the chat. Oh,
Perfect.
awesome. I'm so glad, because even just listening to you, my brain is going like this. Like all these different ideas
Yeah.
are like, ooh, this, ooh, this, ooh, this. And I'm like, that sounds like a project in itself, being able to decipher which one
Totally.
to send over. Yeah.
No, 100%. No, and so anyone, you are welcome and encouraged. Like, use Josh Grohl is his name. So
Okay.
we are open to that. Resource is open to all. So please use it however it's helpful for you.
Awesome. Let Josh know I'll be contacting him.
Perfect.
And I'm sure others listening will be contacting as well. So awesome. Thank you so much. Is there anything else before we wrap up today that you'll like to share before we wrap up?
My one last tidbit is, as you're doing all of this end of year evaluation and planning for next year, just take a moment for celebration too, celebrating yourself and all of the effort you've put in this year, and also just celebrating your teammates. It's such a beautiful opportunity for you to really reflect on like how far you've come throughout the year and get people excited about the possibilities for the year ahead. So celebration, it's big for your external stakeholders, but it's huge for the people that you work with day to day.
Oh, I love that. And thank you for like causing everyone to pause for a second and celebrate. Because we know in the arena,
Yeah,
sometimes we're go, 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 and we're in survival mode and trying to figure out the next thing, that we don't stop and celebrate
I know.
the things that we've accomplished.
I know. It's so tough, but it is really important for us.
Love it. Awesome. So, before we sign off today, Kimberly, you gave us homework, and you probably don't even know that you did. So the homework that everyone has every session, we like to end with some homework or something that you can take back. And I believe it's the SWOT analysis, taking a look
Mhm.
at your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for your organization. And I think this is a really good time as you get ready to wrap up the year and plan what next year is going to look like. So I really encourage you all to, that's going to be homework. Take a look at that. And you can look at that as from an organizational level or within the different teams of your organization as well. But whatever it is, do take a moment and look at your SWOT analysis and plan that. And if you need help doing that, go over to Taproot Plus and you will get your help, pro bono help to help you be able to do that. So that is going to be homework. And
Perfect.
other than that, I encourage everyone, if you know someone needs to be tuning in, or if you're catching us on replay, give us a hashtag replay. If you know someone needs to hear this, go ahead and tag them in the chat so that they can catch the replay of this video and get all the resources that's being shared. Kimberly, I appreciate you coming on. It's always a wealth of, I just know like resources are just going to be flooding whenever you come on. And I
Oh,
just
I'm so
love
glad.
that.
I'm so glad to be hopeful.
Yes, thank you. We appreciate you coming on and look forward to you coming back in the future. um, so other than that, I hope everyone have a wonderful week and we will see you next week, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.